What is up, A Push people? Welcome to today's lecture video. I hope you guys are all doing well and good for yourselves. Um, Today, I hope you watched the Civil War introduction video because that's how we are going to be tackling this chapter, the Civil War. Our first priority is the war begins and the events leading to the war beginning. And a quick refresher, remember Abraham Lincoln elected president? The South said, if Abraham Lincoln is elected president, we are succeeding. So, when Lincoln took office as the first Republican president in March 1861, people wondered if he would challenge the succession of South Carolina and the other states militarily. So before he even got into office, these states succeeded, right? In his inaugural address, so his first address as president of the country, Lincoln assured Southerners that he would not interfere with slavery. At the same time, he warned no state had the right to break up the Union. He concluded by appealing for restraint. Listen to what Abraham Lincoln said. In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. So it's in your hands, and he's talking to the South, that we are approaching a civil war. The government will not assail you, the South. You can have no conflict without being yourself the aggressors. So he's saying in plain English that if the Civil War starts between us, between the North and South, it is your fault and not mine. Fort Sumter. Despite the president's message of both conciliation and warning, the danger of a war breaking out was acute. Most critical was the status of two federal forts in states that had succeeded. One of these, Fort Sumter in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina, was cut off from vital supplies and reinforcement by Southern control of the harbor. Rather than either giving up Fort Sumter or attempting to defend it, Lincoln announced that he was sending provisions of food to the small federal garrison. He thus gave South Carolina the choice of either permitting the fort to hold out or opening fire with its shores batteries. Carolina's guns thundered their reply, and thus on April 12, 1861, the war began. The South attacked Fort Sumter, and the war officially began. No going back. The attack on Fort Sumter and its capture after 2 days of innocent plundering united most Northerners behind a patriotic fight to save the Union. So Lincoln's goal of the Civil War was not to end slavery. It was to unite the Union. Because remember, in his inaugural address, he says he could care less about slavery. Yeah, he defended it he despised it on a moral issue running up to the election. But that was before the South succeeded. Now his goal is to bring back the Union. More than any previous president, Lincoln acted in unprecedented ways, drawing upon his powers as both chief executive and commander-in-chief, often without the authorization or approval of Congress. For example, right after the Fort Sumter crash, he did 3 things. After the attack on Fort Sumter, he did 3 things. First, he called for 75,000 volunteers to put down the insurrection of the Confederacy. Number 2, he authorized spending for a war. And 3, suspended the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus. Since Congress was not in session, the president acted completely on his own authority. Lincoln later explained that he had to take strong measures without congressional approval as indispensable to public safety. So he did those actions to fulfill a mandate of public safety. Before the attack on Fort Sumter, only 7 states of the Deep South had succeeded, and it became clear that Lincoln would use troops in the crisis. 4 states of the Upper South, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, also succeeded and joined the Confederacy. The Confederates then moved their capital to Richmond, Virginia. The people of Western Virginia remained loyal to the Union, and the region became a separate state in 1863. West Virginia and South Virginia. Keeping the border states in the Union, 4 other slaveholding states might have succeeded, but instead remained loyal to their union. The decisions of Delaware, Maryland, Missouri, and Kentucky to not join the Confederacy was partly due to the Union's sentiment in those states, and partly the result of shrewd federal policies. In Maryland, pro-sectionalists attacked Union troops and threatened the railroad to Washington. The Union Army resorted to martial law to keep the states under federal control. In Missouri, the presence of U.S. troops prevented the pro-South elements in the states from gaining control, although guerrilla forces sympathetic to the Confederacy were active throughout the war. In Kentucky, the state legislature beat voted to remain neutral in the conflict. Lincoln initially respected neutrality and waited for the South to violate it before moving in federal troops. Keeping the border states in the Union was a primary military and political goal for Lincoln. Lots of reading. So Lincoln's goal was to keep the border states, keep the border states alliance to the Union. To the Union. So he succeeded in those results. The Confederate Constitution was modeled after the U.S. Constitution, except that it provided a single 6-year term for the president and gave the president an item veto, the power to veto only part of a bill. Its Constitution denied the Confederate Congress the powers to levy a protective tariff and to appropriate funds for internal improvements. But it did not prohibit the foreign slave trade. President Jefferson Davis tried to increase his executive powers during the war, but Southerners' governors resented attempts at centralization, some holding back troops and resources to protect their own states. At one point, Vice President Alexander H. Stephens, in defense of states' rights, even urged the secession of Georgia in response to the despotic actions of the Confederate government. So here's the weird dynamic between the vice president and the president of the Confederacy. You see this vice president advocating for another secession. Yeah, it was complicated. The Confederacy was chronically short of money. It tried loans, income taxes, and even impressment of private property, but these revenues paid for only a small part of war costs. The government issued more than $1 billion in paper money, so much that it caused severe inflation. By the end of the war, the value of a Confederate dollar was less than 2 cents. The Confederate Congress nationalized the railroads and encouraged industrial development. The Confederacy sustained nearly 1 million troops at its peak, but a war attrition doomed its efforts. So this war cost money for both the Union and the Confederacy, and they were both paying to fulfill it. So the only section I skipped in this lecture was the wartime advantages. I want you to go ahead and read that section yourself. Look at the document I provided you and fill out that chart that I provided you as assignment number 1.